Welcome back to World Traveler. This is Dennis Callan for the Hawaii Geographic Society. Now we're off to Quebec. We'll take you into some of the finer stores and restaurants in Quebec and give you an overview of this city. It's got a wall around it. It has some outstanding museums and marvelous old streets and fantastic restaurants and art galleries and antique stores and all the trappings that you would hope to go with such a historical place. This is Dennis Callan for the Hawaii Geographic Society in Quebec City. This is one of the most historic cities in all of North America. It was founded way back in the early 1600s by the French originally, and it has quite an interesting history of going back and forth from French control to British control. They struggled particularly throughout the early 1700s. And finally, there was a decisive battle. You see the cannons behind me. That's one of the remnants of the military history. There was the big battle in 1759 in which the British finally beat the French. And by 1763, Britain took control of Quebec and of Canada. And it's been British ever since. But of course, there's a lot of French influence still here. In fact, most of the people in Quebec speak French. That's how French it is. Something like 85% of the population does speak French. So there's this great history of French and British heritage, and yet of course today obviously Canada is an independent nation with its own cultural identity. Quebec was besieged many times in the 1700s by the British, then the French. It changed ownership, it swapped back and forth, and so it became very much a fortified citadel. It's really a historic spot. The walls were first constructed back in the 1630s, 1650s when Quebec was first founded by Champlain. And the walls were built up ever since. And it's really a traditional pattern that you find throughout Europe in the old days, a city surrounded by walls. This is the only walled fortified city north of Mexico. It's nothing like it any place in America. And yet this was the model for towns throughout the Western world back in the 15th century, 14th century, back in the medieval period, even on right up into the dawn of the modern age, the 20th century. It means that what you find inside the wall today is a well-preserved historic town, as we're showing you with the old streets and the old buildings and old restaurants and cafes. And a lot of modern shops as well, too. There's all kinds of great shopping here in Quebec City for people to enjoy on their travels. You'll find unique handcrafted things that you just won't find anyplace else in your travels. You have some unique Canadian types of things, beautiful woolen goods, hand-carved, some Indian types of artifacts and goods, as well as your normal range of souvenirs and shoes and belts and purses. So it's just a great place. It's got something for everybody, and there's some really fine museums here as well in Quebec City. So put this on your list of places to go. The old town is clustered within the walls, and then there's the lower town, as you see here down below, which is an even older part of Quebec. We're in the Petit Champlain district of the lower town of Old Quebec. This is about the oldest commercial neighborhood in North America, and it's completely preserved today. You can see these old shops and restaurants. It's a great place to poke around. We're in the lower town of Quebec, which is the oldest part of town. It was the first area that was populated. It goes back to the 1630s, 1640s, and this street is the oldest street in the Americas, and it's still functioning today. It's in beautiful condition. The buildings are beautifully maintained. The interiors are really quite modern. They've done a great job of renovating and fixing up this neighborhood for your enjoyment, to come here and do some looking around and some shopping. And it's a very fun spot to be. There's shops of every description here, handmade goods, there's little cafes, little restaurants, there's historic structures as well. So this is one of your real focal points to come and have a look at when you're visiting Quebec. So the street was first occupied and settled back in 1660, and it's been occupied ever since. Today it has a neighborly feel to it. The shopkeepers all know each other, and look out for each other. They've got their family dogs down here playing. They bring the kids down to the shop. And each of the stores is operated independently, and they put a real emphasis on crafts and handmade goods and unique specialty items that you're not going to run into elsewhere. So it's not one of those uniform shopping malls where every other store has the same stuff. It's really worth a good serious browse, and you'll find a lot of handcrafted items like we did in this scarf shop. It's a special treat to see goods being made on the premises. You're painting on silk?
Yeah.
So all of the pieces in here are like that?
Yeah.
Painted by you?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Oh. Very nice.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Her hand-painted scarves were so attractive that we bought several. They make good presents and real easy to pack in your suitcase, of course. There's a number of stores along the street that are just like that little gallery, where the shop owners are working inside, creating the handcrafted goods for sale. Rue Petit Champlain was first occupied way back in 1660. At that time, the buildings were constructed out of wood, and there was a big fire in the 1680s that burned the whole thing down. So the government decreed that all of the subsequent buildings would be made out of stone. You can buy little models of those buildings to take home if you like. Whole variety of things in these shops. They range from the pure fine art gallery to the semi-kitsch souvenirs and inexpensive beer mugs, art reproductions. And you get some nice local Indian art here as well on the street. And this neighborhood, there are several little side streets and one called the cul-de-sac that has more shops on it. And there's pubs in the neighborhood, restaurants, wine bars. Just a great spot to be. Back in the old days, in the 1600s, it was the waterfront. It's still very close to the waterfront, just a few blocks away, but in 1660s, the high tide would actually flood the street. And that was their refuse disposal. They would just put the garbage out at low tide, and the tides would wash it away. Well, things have improved considerably nowadays. The interiors here are all quite modern and up to date. The neighborhood naturally fell into decline, and then in recent years, back in the 1970s, some enlightened developers took over and decided they would encourage quality shop owners to come in. Here we have another example of a quality shop selling Indian arts. You have a very strong feeling for the native Indian culture here in Quebec. They believe that the first American Indians probably got to Canada anywhere from 11,000 to 40,000 years ago. They're still not quite sure. The archaeologists are working on that as one of their puzzles. Overlooking the old lower town is Chateau Frontenac, and we'll take you back up there in a little while in the program. We're staying in Quebec for a couple of days in our upcoming tour of Canada. We'll be staying right in the old town, which is a great spot. You can easily walk around and see the entire place in a couple of days. You don't even need a bus tour when you're in Quebec City. Just stay in the old town and do your walking. Again, the Chateau Frontenac overlooking this lower town. You can also do some boat rides on the river. In fact, the river is what gave birth to Quebec City in the first place. That's the main reason why a town was founded here back in the 1620s. It was Champlain who first founded the town, and this is the main square that was established at that time. Bust of Louis XIV. It's a copy of the bust by Bernini that's in Versailles today. Louis was the Emperor of France at the time that Quebec City and New France was founded. You see, they're doing a lot of renovations. They maintain the old facades, but they'll totally rebuild the interior so that you have an up-to-date modern shop inside or a modern residence, but it's the original facade. These date back to the 17th century, to the original foundings of Quebec. So Quebec was a river port city when it was first established. This is the oldest church in Canada, Notre Dame de Victories. Still standing. It was rebuilt in the 1680s and then later in the Palladian style. Several other nice streets stretch out from the Rue Petit Champlain district, all along in the lower town now of Old Quebec City. As a river port, the main goods were furs. You don't find many furs being sold in the stores today. Instead, there's everything but in the 1600s and the 1700s, it was the fur trade that gave birth to Quebec. There's a wonderful museum here in the lower town. The building was designed by Moishe Safdie, who also designed the Habitat, the innovative apartment complex that was at the Expo World's Fair. And Safdie is really one of the most innovative architects in Canada, and he's created a structure, and the museum curators have filled it with the most innovative displays that you'll find anywhere. It's really a wonderful place. You've got to go visit the Museum of Civilization, and you'll find it right in the lower town of Old Quebec City. One segment of the building is devoted to memories. It's the memorabilia, the instruments, the furniture, the clothing, the tools, the hardware of Old Quebec. Here's the forerunner of the snowmobile. Their map shows you the size of the territory of New France in North America. It was huge. It covered all of what is today Canada and half of America west of the Appalachians, all the way down through the Ohio Valley, the Mississippi, down to New Orleans, what later became the Louisiana Purchase. Interesting to recall that France had more territory in North America than England did. Right up until about 1763, that was a defining moment. We'll talk about that later. Of course, they've got hockey exhibits in a Canadian museum, especially a French-Canadian museum in Quebec. It's a real popular spot. The kids can do their slap shots, get a little feedback. And naturally, there's a gift shop where you can buy some memorabilia of various kinds, and they have other sorts of costumes and other cultures represented as well. Here we've got Mesoamerican stone carvings. The museum is quite comprehensive and so modern. Look at this installation with 3 video screens on urban sprawl and development. That particular program was most fascinating. And there's docents who give live lectures in the galleries. An astounding range of objects on display here at the Museum of Civilization. You can easily spend half a day in the museum, and it is state-of-the-art presentation. The neighborhood around it is marvelous. It's the old town once again. We're going further along the coastline of lower Quebec City. We get down to the street that's filled with antique shops. And it's another quaint neighborhood. Cobblestones and interesting stores. Among the antiques, you can find other sorts of little handicrafts. You can buy some souvenirs down here and some clothing. But the large number of antique shops is a reminder once again of the long history of Quebec. First founded about 1600 by Champlain, and then it went through this interesting change of hands from the French to the British several times in the 1600s. They were at each other's throats. 1690, for example, the British attacked and they were repulsed by Frontenac, who has since been immortalized with the name of the Chateau Frontenac. He was the colonial governor for France at the time. Then in the early 1700s, the British came back and fought again. And finally, in 1759, there was a decisive battle in which the English armies took control of Quebec City once and for all from the French. However, the battle continued between France and England. It was part of a larger battle that was going on throughout Europe. In some ways, it really was the First World War. It's called the 7 Years' War, and it finally ended in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. This gave England control of all of Canada. To get from the lower town up to the upper town, you can take the staircase. That staircase has been there since 1620. Or better yet, ride this little funicular. It's a short trip either way, so it makes it very convenient to connect from that lower town where we spent the last moments of our program to the upper town where Chateau Frontenac and the rest of the old city is located. And be sure to go visit the wall. You can walk around much of the wall. It's the oldest fortified town in North America. As we mentioned, it's the only walled town, and the neighborhoods that you're looking at now are within the neighborhood of the wall. So this is the old part of Quebec. The wall was actually first built by the French as a wooden palisade way back in the 1620s. And that came down, it burned down, it was knocked down, fell into disrepair, it was rebuilt. And the British finally really fortified the walls you see here in the 1820s. Constructed at a price of about $37 million at that time, a lot of money. Time for dinner. We found a very nice vegetarian restaurant just outside the wall. You'll find the new town just immediately outside the wall of Old Quebec. And in that part of the city, there's a whole number of restaurants, of course, and some of the larger hotels. That's where you'll find the Hilton Hotel, the Novotel Hotel. They're just a few blocks away from the old city, so that makes a decent place for you to stay if you can't find a nice hotel in the old city. The oldest hotel in the city is the Clarendon. It was built in 1856, and it's in the old town. It's got 150 rooms. You can skate for free here on the public ice rink if you've got your own skates, or you can rent them for a very modest fee. I'd like to take you into a wonderful French restaurant that we discovered in the old town, Saint-Amour. It was tasty. You'll find several dozen real high-quality gourmet restaurants in the old town. Just look around and help yourself. You can't go wrong here.